Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, South Africa switches to Johnson & Johnson vaccinations for its planned coronavirus campaign after data suggests that the Astrazeneca shot, of which the country's ordered 1 million doses, isn't sufficiently effective against the local variant of COVID-19. Also, delayed elections leave Somalia facing a power vacuum after President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed's term expires with no clear succession plan. And Sudanese people who left Darfur out of fear of conflict return, but many wonder whether they've gone home too soon. But first, South Africa's had to switch tack on its immunisation campaign after studies showed that the Astrazeneca shot that the country had been banking on is less effective on the dominant local variant of coronavirus. The suspension of the rollout has left some South Africans uneasy. However, authorities say that they're already adapting their strategy. Sam Bradpeace has more.
We thought that the government was on the ball, but it seems like they had, dropped the ball once again with regards to those vaccines. So it's really disappointing.
You know what? They ordered it before they knew we were going to get variants. And we're going to get variants forever. So we have to wait for a new vaccine and we just have to be responsible for ourselves.
It's not good, yeah. It's a bad representation for the country, especially if they'll be spending tax money to buy the vaccine.
Well, Sam Bradpeace tells us more about the change in tack.
This really is a major step back in South Africa's fight against coronavirus. Just last week, remember, AstraZeneca delivered 1 million doses of the Astrazeneca vaccine. And there was a lot of optimism because these doses were supposed to be used to inoculate the country's frontline health workers. But now, this week, before the rollout could even begin, it was frozen. And this is because of a new trial results, which show that the vaccine itself is largely ineffective in preventing mild to moderate illnesses arising from the new variant of COVID-19 discovered here in South Africa. Now, while the results of this trial are yet to be peer-reviewed, local officials are certainly worried.
I'm concerned because as everybody talking about a possibility of a third wave, we don't know how it will be or when it will be, but according to the modelers, they anticipate around May or June. So I'm worried about that.
The new variant accounts for about 90% of all active coronavirus cases in South Africa, but it's worth remembering that this is not just a South African story. In at least 32 other countries around the world, this new variant has been detected. Now, AstraZeneca are saying that they are still confident that their vaccine can be effective in preventing severe illness arising from this new variant, but the South African government clearly did not want to take the risk. They are banking on a shipment of vaccines from Johnson & Johnson to arrive in the coming weeks and hopefully curb the spread of this particularly contagious new strain.
Sam Bradpeace there for us. Now, Somalia is facing a power vacuum after President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed's term expired on Monday with no clear succession plan. Scheduled elections were due on Monday, but were delayed, and an opposition alliance is against any extension of Mohamed, who's also known as Farmajo's, mandate. Mikawa Shachwayu has more.
The legal term of the president of Somalia, Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, has expired today with no political agreement in place for succession or elections. Talks between political parties on how elections should proceed collapsed last week. It's thrown Somalia into a political crisis. Elections were delayed, first by COVID-19 restrictions and later by disagreements between the leaders of Somalia's federal member states. Two of them, Puntland and Jubaland, pulled out of an election agreement late last year. Jubaland's leader said the president, also known as Farmajo, has abused his powers to try and stay in office. Other opposition politicians have also been critical of the central government.
The Farmajo administration, his administration has sought to increasingly centralize control under his purview in Mogadishu, and that's come at the expense of some of the federal member states within Somalia's federal model. And so that's sparked an inevitable backlash, an inevitable reaction. This dovetails on the constant issues in Somalia we see, which haven't been resolved within the federal model around power sharing, about resource sharing, but it's taken up a new political tone this time around. And so I think that's become infused in the electoral process.
President Farmajo is seeking a second term in office to follow his first, which ended today. Opposition politicians have said that they no longer recognize Farmajo as president and have proposed that a national governing council takes over. The central government controls only a part of its national territory. Analysts have warned that the power vacuum and divisions between political leaders will play into the hands of the armed group Al-Shabaab. In the last week, its fighters have attacked targets in areas that were previously peaceful. The U.S. Embassy in Somalia issued a statement earlier today urging President Farmajo and national leaders to resolve this political impasse. People in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, told us that the tension is palpable and they are terrified because they don't know what will happen next.
Mikawa Shachwani there for us. Now, at least 24 people have died in the Moroccan port of Tangiers after an illegal underground textile workshop was flooded. The victims had been operating out of a private house. 10 people reportedly survived. After a long drought, the country's recently seen heavy rains. 7 former rebel chiefs have been brought in as ministers in Sudan's new cabinet. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok dissolved the previous government on Sunday to make way for a more inclusive lineup. It follows last year's peace deal with a rebel coalition. The country's new finance minister is an ex-rebel leader whose group played a major role in the Darfur conflict, whilst ousted former President Omar al-Bashir was still in power. Since 2003, fighting in Darfur has cost 300,000 lives and displaced millions. Some rebel groups still refuse to work with Hamdok, and despite last October's peace deal, clashes continue. Nicolas Chemin has more.
In the village of Hamada in Darfur, many of the school children come from former displaced families. Their parents returned here in recent years. In 2020, the Sudanese government and rebels signed a peace deal. The Darfur conflict had lasted 17 years and killed some 300,000 people. But in January, there were new tribal clashes in the region, which left some 250 people dead.
وضربوا في الناس النمرة 2 يعني خايفين من البلد ما قاعدين يقبلوا يجوا لله والشرطة مواصلات ما عندهم كميتهم بسيط والجيش جاتهم كميتهم بسيط.
Locals are accusing Arab militias of attacking them.
البقر العرب ده بس عرب ده في يوم تلقون ناس المنطقة ده بسوقهم يوم تلقون الرغاية بقصوا أمات وبدقوم دقول الحاصل فوقنا الناس ما لله الرجال ذاتهم يوم يلقون بمسكهم. The
initial Darfur conflict broke out in 2003 when rebels launched an insurgency. They complained of oppression by the Arab-dominated government led by Omar al-Bashir. He was ousted in 2019. But the Darfur clashes killed some 300,000 people. Sudan's transitional government, led by Abdallah Hamdok, has agreed that the former dictator should stand trial before the International Criminal Court for his role in the Darfur conflict.
In DR Congo, the UN and some NGOs say that they are worried about crackdowns on political activists, government critics and journalists under President Felix Tshisekedi. He took over from Joseph Kabila in 2019. Our correspondents report.
Josue and his friends remember the exact spot where they were arrested on the 18th of December.
C'était juste ici. Je me souviens, la police est venue, la police était lourdement armée.
These activists were demonstrating against insecurity in eastern Congo when the police forced them into a vehicle and took them to an isolation cell. They were then transferred to Goma's central prison. They were released 10 days later without ever having gone to court.
On nous a mélangés avec certains criminels de guerre, certains assassins. Il n'y avait aucun grief contre nous. Et on nous a libérés sans nous dire même la raison de notre arrestation.
Josue and his friends are not an isolated case. In November, popular singer Chala Mwana was detained by intelligence services for 24 hours after being accused of criticizing President Tshisekedi in one of her songs. Journalists have also faced threats. RFI's Pascal Mulegwa has been sued for defamation over a story in which he cited an NGO report accusing a former minister of embezzlement. Human Rights Watch says these are worrying signs of growing political repression in the country.
The first year of Tshisekedi's mandate provided some encouraging signs with respect to human rights. We've seen the release of many political prisoners. 2 years later, President Tshisekedi's commitments to respecting human rights are starting to sound like broken promises.
Meanwhile, DR Congo's government has tried to distance itself from some of the alleged violations. It says it condemns them, but is sometimes limited in its ability to respond quickly.
On ne peut pas donner l'impression que l'exécutif a à se substituer au pouvoir judiciaire, fait-il pour les raisons légitimes de protéger les droits de l'homme. Tant qu'il n'y a pas eu un jugement définitif, c'est qu'au niveau de l'exécutif, nous sommes pratiquement limités à agir.
The UN recorded 935 violations of democratic freedoms in the DRC in 2020, a 17% increase from 2019.
Now, Tanzania continues to draw tourists, even as concern mounts about the reality of the coronavirus infection rate in the country. President John Magufuli's been playing down the risks, but there is dissent from the Catholic Church and even some politicians.
You find there are contradictions. On the one hand, the government wants to play down the whole thing, but on the other hand, the government, state television itself, is broadcasting advertisements that are telling people to take care.
I have not really been afraid because, I mean, come on, we have to live our lives. We have to continue living. Yeah, and Corona is going to be there, but we have to continue living. Yeah.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Allez-y, filmez! Filmez pour l'histoire!
It's 2011 and rebellion begins sweeping across parts of North Africa and the Middle East. This is the Arab Spring. From Tunisia to Egypt, from Syria to Yemen, thousands of people defied the authorities and risked their lives to demand freedom, equality, and better lives.
Confronting police who are shooting tear gas directly at them, as you can see behind me. Look at the protesters right behind me.
Relive history and the early months of the Arab Spring through the notebooks of France 24's correspondents and our reporters' stories. Catch reporters on France 24 and France24.com.